Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here so early and sharing this incredible view of the city that we have here. I'm Bonnie Erbe. I host the PBS Women's weekly news analysis show, To the Contrary. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the third annual International Women's Breakfast on Capitol Hill, hosted by Women Thrive International, Women Thrive Worldwide. This year is especially significant because next week marks the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. And if you've been online reading about the events worldwide that are taking place next week, it is just incredible. And then, of course, the White House this week released the first report in 50 years on women's advancement in the United States. So it's really a heady time for women generally and women worldwide as well. And, of course, we all know that former Chilean President Michelle Bachelet has just launched the UN program on women. So this is a great time. Internationally, particularly, the movement is really starting to take off, and to be involved in this issue right now, your timing couldn't be better. We want to start today by thanking Congressional Host Committee co-chairs Senator Amy Klobuchar, Richard Lugar, and Representatives Joanne Emberson and James McGovern, who is here. Good to see you, Jim. And as well as our entire Congressional Host Committee for their support of the event. And members will be coming in and out, so as they come in and out, we will be slipping them into the program. We also welcome and acknowledge our extremely distinguished embassy guests that we have with us this morning. Ambassador Fatou Daniel Diagne of the Republic of Senegal, if you could wave to us. Don't see that person here yet. Ambassador Mamadou Traoré of the Republic of Mali, and Ambassador Angele Niyuhire of the Republic of Burundi. Yes, no? Okay, we will get back to those people as they come in, and we want to acknowledge and thank the many colleagues we have here today from the State Department, USAID, MCC, Department of Treasury, and USDA. We're very grateful to our event sponsor, Land O'Lakes, for its support, and without that support, this event would not be possible, so thank you so much. I first got very involved, I would say, with the international women's movement in 1994, the UN Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, which of course preceded the 95 conference in Beijing, but I always used to say that Beijing was actually Beijing 2 and Cairo was Beijing 1, because when you're talking about population and development, you're talking about women's issues, you're talking about educating women and girls, which is the best way, as we know, to create development, ease population pressures, and particularly help women in developing nations. And that movement has so grown and been so successful. That's not to say that there isn't way more to do, but that movement, which started really in the 70s and 80s, has really borne fruit in the 30, 40 years since it began. So we have a morning packed with amazing speakers, and ahead of us focusing on a most basic issue that has developed actually since Beijing and Cairo, but it affects us all, which is food security. Doesn't matter if you're a woman in a developing or a developed nation, food security is incredibly important, much more important than it's probably been at any time in history. Here to speak about that is Congressman Jim McGovern, Democrat of Massachusetts. He's an extraordinary congressional champion on global hunger and food security. Congressman McGovern has worked closely on the development and implementation of the roadmap to end global hunger, has co-sponsored the Global Food Security Act, and has been a tireless advocate for the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program. As the co-chair of both the Congressional Hunger Center and the Hunger Caucus in the House of Representatives, Congressman McGovern has led the charge to galvanize the political will to end hunger in our time. We're very grateful to have him as an honorary congressional co-chair of this year's breakfast, and please join me in welcoming Jim.
Well, thank you very much, and I feel very privileged to be here today. And I want to thank all of those who are responsible for putting this morning's program together. I want to thank Bonnie in particular for her generous introduction. You know, in 2009, the House Hunger Caucus, which I co-chair along with Congresswoman Joanne Emerson of Missouri, held a rather remarkable hearing with representatives from nearly every U.S. agency working on developing the administration's new strategy on global food security. And I remember clearly one of the first lines by Gail Smith, who covers these issues on the National Security Council staff. She said, and I quote, "When it comes to food security and agricultural development, we have finally discovered women and nutrition." Well, today's breakfast, on the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day, will be looking at the central role women around the world play in food security. Now, as Gail Smith's words reflect, for too long, the importance of women in food security has been invisible, has been neglected, and has been dismissed. The FAO estimates that women produce over 50% of all the food grown worldwide. In places like sub-Saharan Africa, women grow as much as 80 to 90% of the food. They work longer hours than men. They do the hoeing, the planting, the weeding, the harvesting with the most basic tools and with little outside assistance. They rarely have title to the land. They lack access to credit, to technology, to many of the basic inputs that we take for granted in agriculture, to extension services, or to a seat at the table when agricultural strategies are being planned and developed. They often carry out their farming as well as caring for their families' health, education, and nutrition in areas where they are vulnerable to violence and exploitation. In a word, they are discriminated against and marginalized. But studies show in case after case after case that when women receive the same support as the average male farmer, they increase their yields by 22%. That when women receive an additional year of primary education, their yields increase by 24%. That when women are engaged in developing agricultural strategies for their communities, their plans do a better job of safeguarding the land, protecting the environment, preserving food supplies, and increasing their children's nutrition. And we all know that when women control the income, families thrive. So it is my hope that today's breakfast will shine a light on the importance of women in advancing food security and provide us with tools and strategies on how to empower women and break the legacy of discrimination and invisibility. You know, but it would be a terrible thing if we mark the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day by crippling the funding dedicated to supporting women and agricultural development as a priority of U.S. development. And right now, that's the path we're on, I'm very sorry to say. Now, I don't want to be overly partisan this morning, mainly because I believe this is a bipartisan issue, which has in the past received strong bipartisan support in the House and the Senate up until 2 weeks ago. But we have to have the political courage to stand up and to fight for funding for the Feed the Future initiative and other U.S. bilateral and multilateral programs that address hunger and advance global security, nutrition, and agricultural development. Not because it feels good, not even because it's the right and the moral thing to do, but I'll argue we should do it because it's in our national security and economic interests to make countries food secure, more productive, healthier, and more stable. We all need to be very much engaged in this debate. And we can't take anyone, not just anyone for granted in this debate. We need to push our friends to fight harder to make sure that these developmental programs are protected because they're under assault. You know, I like to tell people I've been in Congress now since 1997, and I've yet to meet one member of the House of Representatives or one member of the United States Senate who's pro-hunger. Yet, I can point to a whole bunch who routinely vote to undercut programs that support anti-hunger initiatives. And one of the reasons why some of my colleagues vote that way is because there is really and rarely no political price to pay for being bad on these issues. And I think that has to change. This is too important. I think it undermines our national security when we walk away from these issues, and I think it undermines our moral standing in the world. And there are some things worth fighting for, and there are some things worth fighting hard for, and the programs that I've talked about are worth fighting for. So I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you to Women Thrive Worldwide for all of their fine work in supporting women, especially women in agriculture around the world. And please make sure that America's ability to help women farmers remains a priority in our budget and our funding decisions, and I promise to be an ally in that battle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. And it's so important to have members of Congress who truly are compassionate and who are standing up for the things that will make this world a better place. Now I want to introduce Ritu Sharma, the co-founder and president of Women Thrive Worldwide. Ritu is one of the leading voices on women's global issues and U.S. foreign policy. She founded Women Thrive in 1998 with the conviction that women in poverty around the world deserved a voice in Washington, and she has not only given them one, but she's given them a heck of a voice in Washington and foreign policy. Thanks to her leadership, coalition building, political strategy, and advocacy, there's more understanding and consensus at this time, particularly as Congressman McGovern pointed out, which is so hard to come to, around gender issues in Washington than ever before. And Ritu believes that she and Women Thrive should be as grounded as possible in the reality of women's lives, so she's lived herself on $1 a day in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Burkina Faso to experience for herself what life is like for the women that she advocates so wonderfully for. Please join me in welcoming Ritu Sharma.
So it's true. I have tried to live on $1 a day 3 times, once in Nicaragua, once in Guatemala, and then this last time in Burkina Faso. And I don't recommend it, but it's a great way to lose weight. So, and learn a lot. I want to tell you about my friend Mariam. You each have her photograph on your table. I spent 3 days with Mariam on her subsistence farm in Africa that last May, and I tried to do everything that she did, and I could not keep up. It's not possible. I literally would have died if I stayed a 4th day. It was rough. And I want to tell you about her life and what food security means to her and her family. Mariam gets up at 5 a.m. every day, and she goes to bed at 10 p.m. She works 3 different fields, and this is how agriculture works in many places around the world. She has her own small field. She has her husband's much larger field, and then there's a communal pot of land, part of it, that belongs to the Women's Association, which she leads, that she also works. And so in any given day, she has to work those 3 fields. In addition to that, every single meal that she makes is made from scratch. So she has to pound the sorghum, grind the seasonings, all from scratch. It is, I'd love to have art be there to spice it up a little bit, let me tell you. So there's no shortcut. So she also decided to start a small business to try to help lift her family out of poverty. Actually, it's 2 businesses. One is selling rice and curry in the Friday market, and the other is selling a little bit of her crops every week, the vegetables in various markets as well. But she she can't possibly do anything more than she's doing now. She literally does not have the time to add any other activity to her life, and her family is still living on less than $1 a day. That is the challenge. Poor people work extremely hard. They are trying to lift themselves up by their bootstraps, but we have to help them. What Mariam needs are fertilizers so that she can get more from the plants that she does get in the ground. She needs training to understand the soils better and how to take care of her crops. She needs a loan so that she can buy some of these things and get going before she actually has the cash to buy them. And she really could use a better road because she bicycles to the various villages to sell her crops, and it's a much longer journey on a bumpy road and a rickety bike. I think the bigger question is, why should we help her? She's living a world away from us. Most of us will never meet her, never see her. Why should we care? I believe that it is not only our moral obligation, there's no question about that, but it is so much in our self-interest as a country. It is so critical to our security. It's a very selfish thing to support aid. It is something that we do because it works and it makes our country safer. So let me spell this out for you. Let me play it out. If we don't help Mariam, what would happen, right? So she can't feed her family of 7 children, which she did not have 7 children by choice. She will pull her girls out of school so that they can help on the farm or they can go sell things and earn money in the market. That's the reality. So those girls will grow up without much of a future. They may be lucky to learn to read and write, but that's about it. So now multiply that family by millions and millions of other African families just like this one, and that means that millions, tens of millions of girls will not go to school. So if she's lucky and keeps her boys in school, which is the preference, they probably will be undernourished and not able to learn very well. But they will want a better future than their parents who had absolutely no education. She has 2 older boys who are already living in the big city, and she does worry about what they're doing and how they're doing, but there's no jobs in farming right now. There's no jobs in subsistence farming, and there's no money to grow the farms. So there's nothing really for them to do, so they go to the city. But what kind of life do they have ahead of them? How are they going to earn a living? How are they going to spend their time? So now multiply that by hundreds of millions of families. And what you have, we don't know what's going to happen, but what we have are very unstable conditions around the world with large populations of people who want a better future but can't get it. They are educated but without jobs. They are very hopeful, but they're hungry. And in that situation, it is only a matter of time until that seed of instability really grows into a tree of global crisis. I think we have seen in Afghanistan and Pakistan, even Somalia, that our country will get engaged at some point. If there is a famine, we will respond. If there is a crisis, we will do something. The question is when, not if we should get involved, when should we get involved? And we are not going to take a risk in places around the world for chaos to prevail and where anti-Western sentiments can then really take root, we are going to have to address those situations. The thing is that we need to do it now. It's a heck of a lot cheaper. It will create a much better world for all of us. But that's the decision that starts now. That's the question that we have in front of us. As I travel around the world, the other thing that I see, particularly in agriculture, is that other countries, China, India, and Brazil in particular, are getting into the game. They are all over Africa. They're going into Latin America, and that's a good thing. We want more donors in the world. We need more countries doing their part. But they don't necessarily have the same goals in mind that our country does when it delivers its aid. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what do we want the U.S. role in the world to be and to look like 10 years from now if we have taken ourselves out of the global community? So we are here today to talk about women in agriculture and women's role, but I don't want anybody here to think that this is a nice ladies' issue. That's not what this is about. This is about national security in a very real way. So thank you, and you'll hear more of us from our panel. Thanks so much for being here.
Ritu, that was great, and I want to add from personal experience, there's yet another reason, which is more selfish, if you will, and not as humanitarian, but sometimes showing Americans that they've got a stake in these things that are happening a world away makes them even more supportive, which is wonderful, and that is business. I was in Morocco covering how USAID funds were used there to help women to set up what were supposed to be family planning clinics, but they weren't actually. They were the only medical access that these poor Arab women had. And they did not provide abortions. That was banned by Moroccan law. But you would see that these women showing up with their pregnant with 3 and 4 children to get access to the only doctor they could get in their whole world. And at that time, I spent some time with one of the attachés at the U.S. AID office there, and he was constantly on the phone with an American cell phone company that was bidding on a contract in Morocco, and they did not get it, even though their bid was cheaper, their service was superior. Why? Because France was giving Morocco so much more in USAID. So the business payoff, which is really important too. I mean, American companies do better when we help women like the one that Ritu just introduced us to. So thank you so much for your work. We now move on to our featured speaker, celebrity chef and co-founder of Common Threads, Art Smith. Chef Art has cooked for some of the country's best-known celebrities. He was Oprah's personal chef for a decade and served as executive chef for then Florida Governor and later Senator Bob Graham. So not unfamiliar with Capitol Hill food preparation either, I would imagine. And Chef Art has received the culinary profession's highest awards, appeared on such TV shows as Top Chef, The Today Show, Fox News, and his TLC series, Barbecue Pitmasters, is now in its 2nd season. He's been named Chicagoan of the Year by Chicago Magazine and Humanitarian of the Year by the prestigious James Beard Foundation. Perhaps most importantly, he owns the restaurant Art and Soul here on Capitol Hill. Please welcome Chef Art Smith.
Good evening, and good afternoon, or good morning, everybody. And when you're in the restaurant business, you know it kind of falls all together. But such a pleasure, and to be here to talk about something that is extremely important to me as a chef. You know, I had a wonderful childhood, but what made my childhood possible were the great women of my childhood, and even women who I never got to meet. And there was a great woman, my great-grandmother, Margaret Geiger, who literally bought the swampland. And from this swampland, she tilled the soil, 5 children, and created an existence for her family in rural southern Georgia and northern Florida. This great, wonderful, wild piece of America became, a haven for yellow fever. And because of that, she had to move the family to higher ground, there to be only met by flu, World War I, the Great Depression. But you know what was amazing about Margaret Geiger Smith is that there may have been war, there may have been depression, but there was always her 12-layer chocolate cake that always appeared on the table, because it was her way of saying, the world may not be where it should be, but peace is here in this home. Food is a common thread that we all share. It all brings us together. One of the great lessons that we learn as a child is to share your food. We must learn to share our food. And through that wonderful agrarian background, I'm happy to say our farm is still in the family because of my mother, Addie Mae, at 77 years old, still works. She's with the Office of Elections, counts those votes by hand. And an amazing woman she is, and she continues the spirit of my great-grandmothers and making that 12-layer chocolate cake, because all is well. But what's amazing about my life, which is more than 12-layer cake, is fried chicken and other things, and those things that were so well-known in the South, is that how those wonderful foods, we never realize the importance of food. The fact is that food is that thing that makes us, that sustains us, and makes us feel so good inside. But you know what? You want to be heard? Feed people. Okay, you want people to care about this? Feed them. You want them to really care? Feed them over and over again. My life has been about feeding important people, and a very important people I fed was Oprah Winfrey. And it was through that relationship, she engaged me to not only care about who I was as Southern American, as she is, to care of the fact that, Art, you came from those tobacco fields, you came from that farm. What is your purpose? Well, you're here to cook, but you're to cook for people. And it was through that relationship that she introduced me to the world, through television. But one of my most wonderful experiences was the fact of being introduced to the world and to South Africa at the Oprah Winfrey Girls Leadership Academy, where over 400 young girls across Africa have the opportunity to have an incredible education. And with this education, these incredibly talented children who, you don't even think about where the child comes from. The fact is that the human spirit is so great, and that these children are these shining light, these beacons of light that will one day be great leaders in our world. But one thing I love about these children, they all love my great-grandmother Margaret's 12-layer chocolate cake. And they say, Chef Art, please make chocolate cake for us. And it's through that wonderful relation in that school I've gone to the Arctic. I've cooked with the Sami children, the indigenous people of the Arctic, learned to lasso a reindeer, learned to try to understand the importance of indigenous cultures and how, even though our modern cultures can sometimes take away from those wonderful cultures, and that how precious land is, the importance of land, the importance of the farm. In my own home and where I come from, the importance of keeping that farm and the importance of tending the soil and people eating from that soil. And what's amazing about this whole life and relationship that's come to be was tragedy came to our country. Our country was hit by one of the most horrible terrorist attacks ever. You here in Washington felt that. And it was from that experience that Oprah sent me to New York to say, I want you to go and I want you to cook for people. I was done as I told it I went to cook. And quite honestly with you, it was probably one of the most difficult things I ever did. And still to this day, I can still remember the expressions of the people and feeling their sorrow and pain. And it was through that, and going to the World Victims Memorial there at Ground Zero, and seeing over 100 countries that were represented in those towers who lost loved ones. We all understand what the loss of a loved one is. It was that where I said, how is it that we can bring the world to the table? As my dear friend says, does it take a tragedy for us to care? Should we wait for a tragedy? Should we wait for an epidemic? Should we wait for a famine to care? The fact is, we must care. And through that, I created a children's charity called Common Threads. It was my belief that you could teach a child to cook. And from that lesson, you could teach many lessons. One of the great things that we learn as is to learn how to take care of ourselves. And through that cooking lesson, that way of taking care of ourselves, we could engage with the child and teach them many lessons. Not only just basic skills of math, arithmetic, and just, most importantly, how to work together as a team, but to really make something really delicious that they would just really love. So I started out in a church basement making biscuits and cornbread. Biscuits and cornbread. Wherever you're in the world, there's bread. It may be known by a different name, but bread is bread. Wherever you're in the world, family is family. It may be known by a different name, but family is family. It's the holy grail of food. And it was through that we started. And it was just a dream. And through that dream, we now teach 2,000 children a year. Because a man that I met, I didn't know who he was, he said, my child, I'm having problems. I need to teach her how to eat. And my mother taught me a lesson. She said, honey, and as she put the food in her mouth, she said, darling, it tastes good. I think you'll like it. And I did the same. So through that gift, thanks to Charles Annenberg Weingarten, 2,000 children in 3 states have an education in food and cooking. Thank you very much. So all it takes is for us to believe that we can create change, and through beliefs, we can do great things. I believed that I could teach a child to cook, and through that, we teach many. And what I say in closing, because I want to say that for me, my life has been made possible because of mothers, because of their love, and we must hold that to center of our hearts, and that mothers and children are the center of that, and that morally, we must take care of women and children around the world. And it is wrong for people to go hungry. Thank you.
I won the contest to introduce Chris. I want to introduce you to Chris Policinski, the president of Land O'Lakes, with which you are all intimately familiar because of their great butter and other things. I also want to recognize Chris and Land O'Lakes for being our event sponsor, which literally you would not be eating breakfast if Land O'Lakes had not sponsored this. So Chris is a rare corporate leader in this country. He is grounded in the Midwest. He is part of the heartland, but he understands the importance of engaging the world, not just from an altruistic motivation, but from a very hard-nosed business acumen. There are many reasons to be out there. Land O'Lakes is doing some of the best work in developing countries, helping people develop cooperatives to work together, to market their goods, and to have a better future. So it is my pleasure and delight to offer to you Chris Policinski from Land O'Lakes.
Ritu, thank you for that nice introduction, and good morning, everybody. I am truly honored to be here and very proud to represent Land O'Lakes as a sponsor of the 3rd Annual International Women's Day Breakfast. It is great to be here. Now, some of you may be familiar with the saying, women hold up half the sky. It's an old proverb and the title of a best-selling book on the status of women in the developing world. The meaning, of course, is that women play a vital role in our societies, and certainly that's true. But it's also true that around the world, women, especially women in developing countries, face significant challenges in securing the most basic of needs for their families, foods. That's in spite of the fact that, as you heard this morning, women are the backbone of agriculture. Worldwide, 36% of the world's farmers are women, compared to 34% of men. In developing regions, again, as you heard this morning, the figure's much higher. In sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, 60 to 70% of farmers are women. So it's a sad irony that women, the majority of the world's farmers, still face food insecurity. As a major agricultural cooperative and food manufacturer, Land O'Lakes is trying to do something about that. For more than 30 years, addressing food insecurity in the developing world has been a driving force for the Land O'Lakes International Development Division, which implements programs, as you heard, funded by USDA and USAID. These programs provide both humanitarian and economic development assistance, often, very often, with a focus on women. So as we prepare to celebrate International Women's Day coming up on March 8th, this is a very appropriate time to talk about this and hold this event. By bringing together leaders in government and business, we can raise awareness of the vital role women play in agriculture and the importance of supporting economically sustainable development programs that assist women and effectively address global food insecurity. Former Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, once said, "There's no development strategy more beneficial to society as a whole than one that involves women as central players." Kofi Annan understood development, and I'd agree with that observation. And over the next few minutes, I'd like to share a few additional observations that I hope will be valuable as we consider our path forward, especially as we grapple with the reductions in government spending and the impact they might have on our foreign affairs budget. Let me start first with a little background on Land O'Lakes, the lessons we've learned over 90 years as an agricultural cooperative, and in more than 30 years of involvement in development directly. I'd also like to talk about what we see ahead in terms of the growing global demand for food and the role that America and American agriculture and American foreign assistance can and must play in feeding a growing and hungry planet. So a little background on Land O'Lakes, and I should say at the outset that as the leader of a cooperative, my perspective might be a little different than business leaders from publicly held companies. And that's because of the unique role our owners, our members, play in the food cycle. Our members aren't just business people, they're farmers. They spend more time on tractors than they do in the boardroom, and they have a very close connection to the land and, importantly, to the people who work the land to feed their families and a growing world population. Our members also know from 90 years of experience that the cooperative system works for small farmers who, when successful, tend to become large farmers over time. Land O'Lakes was formed in 1921 by a small group of dairy producers who believed that by joining together in cooperation, they could have more control over their economic destiny, and they were right. Today, Land O'Lakes has become a force in agriculture, a Fortune 200 company, generating more than $11 billion in revenue and returning still a significant share of our earnings back to our members. Our cooperative serves directly or indirectly more than 300,000 producers with a business that truly spans the farm to the market. With that background, it's probably not surprising that back in the 1980s, when our members looked beyond their own communities to the larger world community, they saw a need that they could make a difference in. Our members believe that by applying cooperative principles internationally, farmers in the developing world could benefit the same way Land O'Lakes members benefit. That was the impetus for forming our International Development Division back in 1981. Since then, our IDD group has facilitated 260 development projects in 76 nations, feeding millions of people and enabling millions more to feed themselves by building an agricultural infrastructure, know-how, and capability. The programs we implement benefit everyone, but many have components that are very specifically tailored and targeted at women. That's because women are large in number in agriculture, but they also face large obstacles. Cultural barriers and traditions often block women from decision-making roles and prevent them from securing the resources they need to become more efficient and profitable. Through the programs we implement, women gain access to some of those resources, to training in agricultural productivity, and how to create their own producer groups and even cooperatives. Over the past 10 years, for example, Land O'Lakes has implemented the co-op model in several African countries, bringing together dairy farmers, many of which are women's groups, to secure credit, access to ag inputs, and profitably market their milk. To promote better nutrition, we implemented school nutrition programs that have fed 1.6 million children in developing countries, and this has revitalized education for girls. One area of Pakistan, for example, more than half the government-sponsored schools for children closed because of poor attendance. After daily food supplements were provided, girls' enrollment grew 200%, 175 closed schools reopened, and 500 new schools were built. Another program that's made a tremendous difference is being implemented in Malawi. Through this initiative, 2,600 dairy farmers, 40% who are women, were each able to acquire a cow. They were also trained in animal care, joined a producer organization, and became linked to a market for their milk. Those women now earn $1,200 a year from dairy farming alone, a 250% increase from what they previously earned. And they use this additional income to improve their children's lives, send them to school, pay for medical care, purchase fertilizers to increase crop yields, in short, provide even greater food security. All this from a single cow. So interesting stories, but what have we learned through our experience? One very important lesson is that by tailoring programs to women, to helping them take part, and by engaging men to encourage them to have a more accepting view of women's participation, very positive changes happen. We've seen the results firsthand. Farming operations become more productive and profitable. Farmers work together to access markets for their products, and the income generated provides greater food security and a range of other benefits, including political stability. Another clear lesson is that cooperative principles work in developing countries, just as they work here in the U.S. They work because of a very simple concept. As people strive to improve their lives, they can accomplish more together than alone. Finally, we learned that effective development programs come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes the programs are broad and ambitious, but sometimes simple approaches, like helping one family acquire one cow, can make a big difference to the people who participate directly and the communities that benefit indirectly from this aid. Now, I'd like to talk briefly and shift gears to talk about the bigger picture, because it's important. As we look ahead, we see a clear growing demand for food worldwide. Population is going to increase from about 6.8 billion people to well over 9 billion people by 2050, with the largest share of that increase in the developing world. To feed this growing population, we're going to need to increase food output by 70%. There's no doubt that American farmers can and must play a major role in meeting this challenge. Our farmers have proven that through the use of modern production practices and the application of safe, proven technology, they can deliver amazing results. Consider this: over the past 6 decades, U.S. agricultural productivity has increased 250%. For example, milk production per cow has tripled, soybean production has doubled, beef production per head is up by 50%. And to bring this back to the individual farmer, in the 1930s, one farmer in the United States fed 10 people. Today, that number's well above 150 people. It's also important to emphasize that today's farmer is doing more with fewer resources and less impact on the environment. To give you just one example, when we compare corn production from 1930 to 2010, there was a 650% increase in output with a 13% reduction in land used for that output. Combine that with the use of less and more benign herbicides and insecticides, and you've got a pretty good environmental story to match the productivity story. Becoming more productive and efficient has been also very good for U.S. consumers. If consumers were spending the same percentage of their income on food as they did in 1930, we'd have $1.6 trillion less to spend on other things in today's economy. So clearly, the great productivity story of agriculture is a story worth telling. Yet ironically, as American farmers have become more productive, there are fewer to tell that story. Today, less than 2% of American farmers or Americans are directly involved in farming. That means 98% of our own population may have a very limited understanding of agriculture. And here's the punchline, and importantly, how food security affects all of us. And as we tell this story, it doesn't stop at our own shores. We also have to tell the global story to expand public understanding of why global food security is so important and why we can't abandon the programs that are changing lives and building vibrant rural communities around the world. Now, as I look out at the audience today, I see a lot of familiar faces, and I recognize I may be preaching to the choir. Some of you I know from my time on the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, a group of leaders that supports a strong foreign affairs budget and a smart power approach to foreign policy, which combines diplomacy, defense, and development. Some of the familiar faces I see are longtime friends of international development and agriculture, and even our own International Development Division. So it's probably safe to say that many people in this room do understand the importance of the U.S. government playing an active role in international development and promoting the role of women in agriculture. All we have to do is turn on the TV to see that when people don't have enough to eat, political instability soon follows. Just consider what we've seen in Egypt, Tunisia, and other countries over the past few weeks. To be sure, there's many issues at play when people rise up against their governments. But food costs and food security do play a big role. And the UN reports that the worldwide food price index is at an all-time high, surpassing the 2008 peak, when rising food costs pushed 64 million people into poverty. So while Americans enjoy relatively stable food price, spending about 10% on our income on food, in other countries like Egypt, for example, food costs consume 40% and are growing. So as the cost of food increases, making food security an issue for more people, we have even greater potential to see political discontent. Around the world and right here in the United States, when people go hungry, there are riots in the streets. And when peace and security are threatened in one place, it very quickly affects the global community. But if I'm preaching to the choir today, there's a larger congregation that needs to hear this message. A recent poll found that Americans vastly overstate the amount of foreign assistance that the U.S. government provides. Most of those surveyed thought the U.S. spends 25% of its budget on foreign aid. In fact, as all of you know, just over 1% of the federal budget currently goes into foreign assistance. And when Americans are asked where the budget cuts should come, foreign aid often tops the list. Now, there's a disconnect between perception and reality. And as our government deals with our budget deficit, no doubt some tough decisions will have to be made. The question is the 1% of our budget spent on foreign aid valuable? Well, I can tell you from Land O'Lakes' perspective, the answer is a resounding yes. International development programs do deliver value, not only by enhancing the quality of life for millions of people, but by helping people in developing countries become more self-sufficient. Some people think of foreign aid as a handout, but our experience at Land O'Lakes shows that the best programs provide a hand up with a path toward independence. And by stimulating agriculture in the developing world, we're often extending a hand to women because in a very real sense, women are the heart of their families, their communities, and agriculture. Now, I started my remarks by saying women hold up half the sky. They do. But that can be a pretty daunting task, and a little help along the way can make a world of difference. As business leaders and government leaders, let's make our voices heard. Let's express our support for the programs that are changing lives. Let's express our support for the reality of what the 1% does, not the perception that exists in America, and help stop the cycle of hunger and poverty where we can. Thank you very much.